Welcome, 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 everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We are talking about how to become media ready. And we have my colleague and my friend, Paula Rizzo, here, who's going to share all insider tips. So if you are joining us live, please say hello in the chat. Let us know where you are watching from today. We both love to shout you out. And as we're going along, we want to hear what's resonating with you as well as what questions you have. So you can type those in the chat as we go. But let me introduce myself quickly. I am Melody Wilding. I am a executive coach. I am the author of a book called Trust Yourself, which you may be here because you have read that. And I'm also a LinkedIn learning instructor alongside Paula. And let me also introduce you to our guest quickly today, so you know you are in good hands. So Paula Rizzo is an Emmy-Award winning TV producer, best-selling author, media trainer, and strategist. And her specialty is training authors and thought leaders, experts to be better on camera and produce their own videos. She is the author of two books now.
Two books, yes.
Listful Thinking and Listful Living. And Paula is also a LinkedIn learning instructor as well. As I mentioned, she's a frequent speaker, media contributor. She does all of the things. And what we're here to talk about today is her course called Media Ready Author. And if you want a sneak peek of that, Paula has been kind enough to offer a really great freebie for everyone in attendance here today. It's 10 questions that every author needs to be able to answer. And I would say this also applies if you aren't just an author or you aren't an author yet. If you're any kind of expert thought leader, you want to be able to answer these questions. And so there is a QR code here on the screen. It says 10 questions. So make sure you take out your phone, go to the camera app, and that will bring you a link directly to that page to download that freebie. So Paula, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm so glad LinkedIn Learning brought us together, or else I don't know if our paths would have crossed, but I'm so glad that here we are.
That's right. That's right. And I've given people a little bit of a glimpse into your bio, but I would love to start with how in the world did you get into this work you're doing today around media training? What led you here?
Well, I have worked in TV news for close to 20 years as a producer, working in local and national news, producing the news of the day. So whatever was happening for a long time in New York City, I was, part of the team that was behind that. And then I worked in national news for a long time, working in health and wellness. So I created a lot of great stories about, why green tea is good for you and, why you should exercise more and all of those things. Something that came up again and again was that I would book authors because it was something that was for a TV producer. It was easy because you knew that you have an expert embedded here. You have somebody who already has gone through the publishing process, whether it be self-published or traditionally published, and you know that they've been vetted. But the thing that always broke my heart was that I couldn't always say yes to every author because some of them were not quite ready for TV. So they weren't quite there. And I didn't have the time or the energy to be able to, help to coach them to be ready, to be good enough on camera where we could bring them on and have them be part of the show. And while I was working in TV news, my first book came out, Listful Thinking, and so I know this from both sides. Also, as the author who has to now have this book and put it out in the world and be its best advocate. So when I decided to leave TV about, oh my gosh, it's 6 years ago now, I was like, you know what, I want to be able to help people get over the fear of talking about what they know, talking about what they love, because the truth is we want people to know about your books. We need people to, because if we don't, then there's a whole bunch of people out there that don't know the same thing you do, and it's a disservice.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so true. And I remember the rude awakening when my book came out. And I'll just tell you this story really quick. I don't think I've ever shared this publicly, that right when my first book came out, I landed my first TV segment interview. And I thought it went great. All the technology work, the host was very engaged and interested.
Sure.
And when I got off, I got feedback from my publicity person, and they were like, yeah, so we don't think you're going to get any more TV.
Oh no.
Dagger to the heart. And it was because I didn't ramble, but I went on way too long. And I just didn't know how to succinctly deliver the key messages of my book. And frankly, that's been something I've been trying to work on ever since. So I wanted to have you on today because I have lots of thought leaders, speakers, authors, aspiring thought leaders, experts, authors in my audience. And I know one of the number one things that stands in their way is putting themselves out there on camera and on media and being able to do so in a way that they're not overthinking things. They are sharing their message concisely
Sure.
and powerfully. So
Oh man, I'm so sorry that happened to you. But that,
it's
you know
painful.
what? That is just it's this is not the first time I've heard stories like this before. It's what happens because you think, "Oh, I'll be great. It'll be fine. I know what I'm talking about. I wrote a whole book about it." It's not the same to have written it as saying it. And you have to practice speaking out loud about the book. How does that sound? Should I not say that word because it sounds weird when I say it, Like lists. Lists is such a hard word to say. I wrote 2 books about list making. When I read the audiobook, I was like, oh, why did I put this word in there so
Yes.
many times? It's so hard to say. But you do need to practice these things because how would you know?
Oh, it's so true. And so, and I just want to shout out some folks that we have here watching. And if you are joining live, say hello in the chat. Marlene from London, good to see you. Amber, great to have you here as always. And Adekemi from Nigeria, excellent. So happy to have you. And again, if you're just joining now, say hello in the chat. Let us know where you are watching from as we're going along. Share your questions in the chat as well, because we have Paula here. We want to be able to access all her amazing wisdom. So, Paula, you were starting to get into what does it mean to be a media ready author? You were starting to get into that, but can you tell us more your definition? What does it mean to be media ready?
When the media calls, you are ready to go. So you are not saying, nope, I can't do it. Or, oh, could we do it in a week so I could practice? Or, oh, I don't have the right outfit. Or my lighting is not good. I'm on vacation. I mean, I did a media interview once in Cancun in my bathing suit outside. Thankfully, it was a phone interview. But I was like, oh, I'm saying yes. Because I think it was like MSNBC or something. I was like, oh, I'm totally doing this. It has to happen. Because when you say no, the producer moves on and they find someone else who says yes. And then that person becomes their go-to expert. And that person becomes the one that they call and they know that's reliable. Look, you don't always have to say yes. You really don't. But when you're first establishing yourself, you should, because media really begets media. As soon as you do one, you start to get more interest from other media outlets because they start to see who's the expert that people are going to. Who's the person out there? Oh, and she was really good. She had a lot of really great things to say. She looked poised. Her background looked good. She had a microphone. Her audio sounded really great. It's an easy yes. They can go to you right away. And also, you feel confident. Yes, you'll still get jitters, but you won't feel that same sense of anxiety where it's like, oh gosh, it's so painful. I don't know if I want to do it. And I get it. It still sometimes happens, but you will feel that less. So that's part of being media ready.
Well, and I just want to underscore what you're saying with it. You do have to be ready on a moment's notice where they may call you for a segment and it's tomorrow and you have to be ready to go. You don't have much time to prepare. So, like you were saying, time is of the essence, and building those relationships. What I have found is reliability. It
Yeah.
seems like it's something so simple and foundational. I would say that is the number one key that has gotten me consistent media over time is I'm reliable, I'm solid, I reply quickly, right? I'm responsive as well. And that goes a very long way.
It's true. Producers and editors have a job to do.
Yeah.
And that job is to find an expert, find somebody who can talk about this story, and then they move on to the next story. So if you can, have a little highlight in their day there where they're like, great, check this off, got somebody great, I don't have to worry about that segment, you will forever have a little special place in their heart. And I know because I had experts like that my entire career, which was wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, what are some of the most common misconceptions you see about authors, thought leaders who are starting to embark on their media journey? What are the most common myths or things that come up for them?
Well, one is that they think, oh, I'll be fine. I don't need to practice. I talk about this stuff all the time. Let me just get on and start talking. And then you ramble and then you go on and on and on. And you really do need to be able to practice what I call the accordion method. So, the way that I teach it to my clients is having a short, a medium, and a long answer to any question that you'll be given. So then that way you can sort of decide, okay, is this a short interview? Is this a long interview? Which part of my, explanation am I going to give? Will I be giving the full story or just a little snippet, a little headline so that it, encourages the conversation to keep going, but I'm not going on and on.
Yes. Yeah. And being prepared because
Yeah,
you may think you're going to have a lot of time and then your segment gets cut down to 1 minute when it
totally.
was supposed to be five. And you have to be able to adjust again on a moment's notice. So
Yeah. It
excellent.
takes practice. It does. I mean, it's not going to always be a home run, but it's something that I think people often, another misconception is that for authors at least, they think, oh, I'll do media when my book comes out. And I always say, well, it's too late, really. I mean, it's never too late. You always want to do some media, but it's better if you start way before. I mean, I started a blog years before I had a book, and I started getting media as an expert in list making and productivity. I mean, I don't have a degree in productivity. I was a TV producer for a long time. I was able to really get things going, make checklists, make sure things were happening when they should and all of these things. And I knew if I got a little bit of media cred for that blog, I would be looked at differently. I would be
Mhm.
looked at as an expert in the field. And I was. And then that made it much easier for me to go along the author journey because then when you're writing your proposal and you're looking for an agent and the agent is then shopping it out to publicity, they say, oh, and to publishers, oh, this person knows how to get media already. They've gotten media for themselves and they didn't even have a book yet. And you want to be able to not only know how to do that, but also feel really confident being able to talk on camera or create sound bites or whatever it is so that you're not a deer in headlights the first time this happens.
Yeah, and to that point, I want to call everyone's attention to the fact that you've put together a list of 10 questions as an author
Yeah.
you should be able to answer. And again, that the QR code for that is on the screen here. We'll make sure the link is in the chat later on, but for the QR code, just open your camera app on your phone and it will take you right to that page. But as Paula was saying, the proactive preparation is not only invaluable so you're ready when the opportunities come, but to your point, Paula, it also helps you clarify your ideas and think through what the heck am I trying to say when you're
Yes.
having informal conversations, when you're networking with someone and you share, oh, I'm working on a book, and someone says, oh, what is it about?
Of
You can
course.
crisply answer that as well. And I was going through the questions you offer in there, and I was thinking, I'm working on my second book right now. And I
Ah.
was thinking to myself, I wish I had asked myself these questions when I started writing this, because it would have saved me a lot of time in terms of clarifying my thinking and where I was.
Oh, I love that. I love
Yes.
that. Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting too is uh, a lot of times people will think, as far as when the book comes out and when they'll do media, part of what I think the fun part is getting the reaction from the interviewer.
Mm.
So when you're doing this ahead of time, before the book comes out or whatever, let's say you're doing a podcast. And this happened to me a few times where someone would interview me. I would answer the question and then they'd say, oh, you mean like this? And then they would explain it back in a different way. And I'd say, you know what? That's a better way to explain it, actually. And then I would do it like that the next time because I was like, now people understand it better if I heard it that
Mhm.
way. So it's kind of like you're workshopping every single time you do an interview in the beginning. And you get to see what resonated most, something you thought, oh, people were going to get really excited about that and no one cared. And then the other one detail that you were like, I'll just throw it in as a little side thing, whatever, that ends up being half the conversation.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. I can't tell you how many times that has happened. And it leads you to what's resonating with people. What could I be creating more content around? Because
Sure.
people are really picking up on this idea. This has a hook, right, for the media right now. Um, so you were starting to talk about the idea of building an audience as an author, making sure you have someone to launch your book too.
Yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit about this idea of building a personal brand. How does that come into play in being media ready, and how should we be thinking about it?
Every author, every expert needs to be thinking like a producer, needs to be their own producer, and needs to start putting out content, whatever it is. It could be any form that you like best. It could be video if you're into video, it could be blog posts, it could be emails, it could be, on Instagram, putting photos up with quotes or whatever it is. But you need to start putting yourself out there so that people know who you are, what you talk about, what kind of value you have. And of course, having an email list is always very, very helpful. That was one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given by someone who worked in the publishing industry. And she said, well, do you have an email list? I said, well, what would I do with an email list? And she said, well, when you have a book, you'll have to be able to tell people that the book is coming out. And that was one of the best things that I ever did, was to just start collecting emails and, come up with a freebie, like the freebie that I have here, the 10 questions every media, person has to answer for their book. And that's like not only in the media, but it can also be at book events. When you're speaking to publishers, when you're shopping your book to agents, they're going to ask you questions and want to know how well can you articulate what it is that your book is about.
Yes, you again, you have to be ready to crisply do this. So how should someone go about building their personal brand, especially if they're earlier stage
Mm.
in their author expert journey?
I think it's good to always think about what are the questions that you're answering the most.
Mm.
What are those things that people come to you for? That they say, hey, could I get your opinion on this? Or what do you think of that? And you just kind of keep that FAQ file of all the questions you get asked. And then that becomes your content. That becomes
Mm.
the first piece of, oh, I should be talking about this. Maybe it's not just me who knows this. And that's what I think happens a lot of times. We think, oh, everybody knows this. Not everybody knows what you know. So it's really important to be able to get out there and tell people, hey, this might help you. That might help you. Here's something I found that worked. Here's a client of mine who did this. You want to be able to be a resource. It's always about, how can I give? How can I be out there and be of service? I've always looked at being in the media as a public service and being able to help people live a better life, to learn something new, to do, whatever it is. But you really have to be thinking of like giving first. And a lot of times the problem, especially when a book is at stake, people, yes, you want people to buy the book, right? Like that's the point, is so that you get book sales. But at the end of the day, it shouldn't matter whether or not they buy the book.
Mm.
You need to give value. You need to have people feel like they've learned something from you. And then it's like, oh, but I love her. Of course I want to buy the book. You want them to fall in love with you and know that you are a great resource and you have a lot to say on the topic and that you'll be really helpful for them.
Mhm. Yeah, and I found that's what news outlets, media outlets care about the most, is they want something that's actionable, practical. Their biggest concern is this going to get clicks, shares? And so the more you can help them with that, the better.
Yeah, and they're not interested in being, an advertiser for you. This is not
Yes.
about free advertising. As much as you would love that, it's just not the way it works.
Yeah. So what are some key strategies for authors to effectively pitch themselves to media outlets, to journalists? Where do you even get started?
Yeah, well, you have to read the magazines, watch the TV shows, watch all of that. And so often people say, "Oh, I don't watch TV, but I want to be on the Today Show." Why do you want to be on the Today Show?
Mm.
Do they do any kind of segments like what you're proposing that you do? If they don't, you're never going to be on the Today Show. They have a very calculated system for how they do the newscast. They know exactly who's watching and what they need. And so you do want to watch these shows. You want to read the magazines. You want to know who's the audience. And a sneaky way to do this is to look at the advertising, because the advertisers know full well who is buying the magazines, who's watching the TV shows. They're spending a lot of money on those advertisements to know exactly the demographic. So if you check out the commercials, you'll say, okay, this is who the target is, right? You're watching an evening newscast. It's an older demographic. You're watching a lot of, medicine and pharmaceutical advertising, that kind of thing. So you'll see, okay, that's the vibe. Those are the people who are watching can I pitch something that would make sense to them? Because if you pitch a show that's for older people and you say, "Oh, I'm going to, pitch 5 ways to make a healthier school lunch for your kid." They don't care. They don't have little kids, right? So it's never going to work. So you want to make sure that it aligns with the outlet that you're reaching out to.
Mm.
The other thing is there are 3 main elements to a pitch: the hook, the twist, and the takeaway. So the hook is the why now. What's happening right now in the news or in the world that would really, resonate with the news outlet? Maybe it's a holiday. Let's say, I don't know, Valentine's Day or something, right? And so
Mhm.
this is the hook. The twist is, how is this story different than every other story we've heard on this before?
Mm.
And then the takeaway is, what do they actually take away by watching this segment? What do I do tomorrow that changes my life? How can I implement this so that I'm able to do something differently and my life is better?
Mm. That I love that simple framework. Hook, twist, takeaway. That's
Mhm.
brilliant. I love that.
Thank you.
And one thing I have found, I do a lot of writing for online publications,
Uh-huh.
and something I found really helpful is a lot of those places publish advertising guides. So
Uh-huh.
they publish publicly, here's our readers, here's what their biggest interests are. So you can go right to that, and it's pretty publicly available on their sites, and you get a lot of good information from
Yeah, it's a
those.
good sneak
Yeah.
peek
Yes,
into the world. Yes.
exactly. And so you were talking about the idea of hooks.
Mhm.
How can we think about connecting our work and finding a unique angle for the
Mhm.
media?
Yeah. Well, it is about consuming media. And I know not everybody wants to watch the news and everybody's like, "Oh, but I don't, it's depressing," or whatever it is. But the truth is, if you want to be featured there, you need to sort of learn it and be a student of this and see, how do they cover other people's information? How do they cover other experts? How do other people get on there? Like, to watch to see what sort of things are they actually putting on the newscast or putting in the magazine or putting in the newspaper. What are those things? You'll start to look at media differently when you're thinking of it this way. You'll say, "Oh, okay, that's interesting that they had that guest on and they have them talking about this thing, even though it has nothing to do with their book." That's another misconception. So often authors say, "Oh, I don't want to do that segment. It's not in my book." I do media all the time about stuff that is not in my book at all. I just did a segment on how to be more organized when you move, because I had just moved. And so I had all of these great checklists and things that I could do, whatever. Is that in my book? No, but there are other things in there that are
Mhm.
very helpful for if you want to be organized in your life. But I didn't say, "Oh no, I can't do it because it's not in my book." I was still identified as the author of Blissful Living.
Mm.
So I was able to still get a shout out for my book, even though that topic is not necessarily in there.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, and I find the more open you are to opportunities, also, you never know when that journalist or that outlet is going to come back and say, "Actually, Paula, there is this thing in your book that we wanna
Yes.
talk to you about." So, sometimes it's also about investing in the relationship and building that visibility for yourself.
And it's a long time thing with a book. I
Mhm,
mean, I'm still talking about lists, and my first book came out, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, and I'm still talking about this book. It's a
mhm,
long time. People put a lot of, pressure and, thought into the launch, which is great, and you should do that, but you need to sustain this over time. So
mm.
you have to come up with other topics, and you have to keep yourself relevant and talking about these things.
Yeah. And I do want to say, as we're going along, share your questions for Paula in the chat here. Again, we have her wisdom today. So pop your questions in the chat. And the next question I wanted to ask you, Paula, is more about preparing, being
Mhm.
ready for an interview. And so we have your 10 questions here, which, if you haven't gotten it already, make sure you check out that QR code here. Paula has put together 10 questions you, as an author or expert, need to be able to answer for the media. Beyond that, high level, what are some other things you recommend to be ready for that interview, whether it's preparing yourself, getting your mindset in the right place?
Mhm. Yeah. A lot of times what I do with my clients is that I have them create videos, and the videos are just for us. And I tell them, you don't have to post this on YouTube. It doesn't have to go anywhere beyond this. But I want you to start getting used to talking to the camera like it's a person and engaging with it like it's someone who really wants to hear what you have to say. And really just practicing that muscle so that when the time comes, you don't feel awkward. This feels like a normal thing that you do all the time. So you come up with maybe some of those questions, and you can take them off the list that we have here, and you can write out the answer if you would like to. Type it out how you would do it, and then from there start to practice. How would I say this? How would I say this out loud? What does it sound like? A lot of times we don't hear our voices say these words, and you really need to, because that I think is part of it too. I've done this with speeches and talks in the past too, where I'll record myself saying it and listen back so that I can hear myself saying it and say, does that sound right? Is that how I want it to sound? So you really do have to watch yourself. I know a lot of times people are like, but I hate watching myself on video. You have to improve. It's part of the thing that you need to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And like you were saying, it's different reading the words on the page than getting your mouth around them, because you were
Yes.
saying lists. Lists is a hard word to say.
Mhm.
And a lot of terms you may be used to writing, but you're not used to saying.
Yes.
And you want to make sure that something that I found for me is, I came from academia. So it's been unlearning writing like an academic and
Yes.
writing more like a human and writing more like,
Conversationally. Yes.
yes, conversationally, like you talk. And that's what the media wants. They want you to be naturalistic. They want you to be approachable, right?
For
Yeah.
sure. Yes. It's all about how can and you want to get across your message as fast as possible. You
Mhm.
want someone who comes up with, I told you the hook, the twist, the takeaway. These are things that are soundbite ready. You want to be able to have thought through the content and the things that you talk about and make
Mhm.
it really easy for people to remember what you're saying.
Yeah, and some of you who are here are my clients, and
Hello.
something I have to confess is that I actually find it really useful to test drive sound bites in webinars, workshops,
Smart.
client sessions, right? Because you're getting your head around them and you're starting to internalize it as second nature, so it comes out of your mouth more naturally.
Great, and it's
Yeah.
nice to have a live audience sometimes too, to get that
True.
reaction, because that's a problem also with video. You're not seeing anybody on the other side for the most part, right? You're just like, "All right, I'm gonna do this and hopefully people go for it," and you've gotta just, like, do your little tap dance. But that takes time, that takes work. I've always done media training virtually. So even before the
Mhm.
pandemic, I was
Mm,
always training people virtually, and a lot of my
mhm,
clients after, when the pandemic started, they said, "We're so happy you made us do that because now we're ready. Now we feel
mhm.
like we already knew what Zoom was. We already had our camera, we already had our lighting, we were already set up."
Is there anything you think about when doing media virtually that's different than you might do if you're preparing for something in person?
Yeah, I mean, there are, of course, technical glitches that can happen. There's, for instance, there can be a delay. So sometimes it's a little bit awkward. You start talking, they haven't finished. There can be a little bit of a dance that you need to sort of, overcome. For instance, I just did a TV interview a few weeks ago, and for whatever reason, their Zoom was messed up, and so I heard everything they said twice, and so I just had to go with it. It was live, and so thankfully, I already knew my talking points. I already knew what I was going to say. So it didn't really, mess me up too much. But
Mhm,
those are the types of things that can just happen, right? And so you have to just go with the flow. And time again, if you're doing webinars, if you're
mhm,
doing things like this, you'll get used to it. It
mhm,
won't be such a big deal, but it is different when you're in person. If you've not been in a studio before, I mean, it can be an intimidating place. My entire career was in a TV studio. So for me, it's not a big deal to walk in there. But when you walk in, I mean, there's lights everywhere, there's people all over the place, there's wires you can't trip over, right? You're in your heels walking in, like hoping, you don't trip and fall, and then you're on the set for literally 2 minutes, and then off you go, and they're on to the next segment, and you're gone, and it's like, that's it, it's
mhm,
over. So there's a lot that you mentally can prepare yourself with for too before you step onto that set.
mhm,
Watching the show helps so that you feel like, oh, I know where I'm going. I know where I'm
mhm.
going to sit. I know what they're gonna how they're gonna address me and all of that.
And I can't stress enough getting there early,
Uh-huh.
not rushing, giving yourself plenty of time so that you're not even more nervous because you're under the gun to get there on a certain
Definitely.
time. Yeah.
Yeah,
And I just wanted to say we're getting lots of comments about how helpful this is. Clara saying, wow, this is so helpful. And Amber was sharing so much of what you're teaching us, Paula, also applies to virtual meetings and
for sure.
presentations. So true.
Absolutely. Yes. I
Yep.
mean, it is really everything, any way that you're communicating, this applies, right? If you're doing a meeting, if you're speaking up in a conference or whatever it is, you want to be able to speak in sound bites because you'll be so much more interesting to listen to. Who wants to
Mhm.
listen to the person who goes on and on and on? You want somebody who's thoughtfully thought through what I'm going to say and they're not just working on it right then. We've seen that so many times with people.
Yes, yes. So, speaking of, I was mentioning not rushing
Uh-huh.
when you're doing this. What other tips do you have for handling nerves and
Yes.
your own anxiety? Because that's a big one that really prevents people from diving into this.
Yes.
Period.
Yes. And you can practice as much as you want. And then when the time comes and it's live, it is always a different story. And so, I always try to remove any variables. So knowing what you're getting into first, visualizing what it will look like, watching the
Mm,
show, knowing what the set looks like, knowing who the anchor will be like. If you can do those things, that's helpful. Watching ahead of time so that you don't have that sort of anxiety of like, well, what is it going to be like? Well, you already know because you've watched, so you already see. So that's step one. And then also having a ritual for yourself to practice so that okay, I've said this a bunch of times. I know how I'm going to say this. I always suggest not memorizing
mm,
because if you memorize, then the second you get caught up and you trip, it's like a downward spiral. So you just really want to have some headline points in your head of what you want to get to because you hopefully talk about this a lot. So having those headline points makes it easier if you do lose your space or you say something out of order, you can get right back in. It makes it a little bit easier. And then I always suggest for people to do box breathing, which is something that the Navy SEALs do
mhm.
to calm themselves down before something big is about to happen. So it's literally, breathing in for 4, holding for 4, breathing out for 4, and just keep doing that. And however you want to do that, whatever that looks like for you, giving yourself a few moments before you hit go, if you're doing this, a live thing or whatever it is, just to sit in your spot, have 2 feet on the floor, have your microphone ready, have everything said, and just think, I'm here to give value. That's what I'm here
Mm,
for. I am here to be of service, to help as much as I possibly can. This is not about me. This is about the audience. This is about them. This is about giving them something that makes their day, their life better. So when you take the spotlight off yourself in that way, it does help.
Yeah, so true. Taking, like you were saying, literally the spotlight where you're focusing on all the ways you could mess up and, oh gosh, people are going to think I'm stupid. And instead focusing in on how do I serve and how do I
Yes.
show up for others. We had a question come from Marlene, and she asked, something that causes me slight anxiety is the tone of my voice and the speed of it. Do you
Mhm.
have any tips around managing that aspect? Because I can imagine many of us, when we get nervous, we tend to talk faster, or
Yeah.
the tone of our voice goes up and may sound a little pitchy.
Mhm.
So, any thoughts around that?
Well, it is knowing first, right? So you already know, which is good. So recording yourself, watching those videos over and knowing and understanding, oh, okay, that's what I do when I'm a little bit nervous. So
Mm,
being able to slow yourself down and try it a few different ways. Try your delivery in different ways to say,
mm,
okay, you know what? I'm going to record this one and try to do it more slowly. Let's just see. What does it look like? How does it sound?
mhm,
And if you're in a room, this is something that I always tell people, if you're looking to keep your energy up because it can be difficult when you're in a room by yourself. You're really not getting any feedback from anybody because it's
mhm,
just you. Filling the room with the sound of your voice is truly the best way to keep your energy up, to keep yourself projected, to really have your feet on the floor and feel like, okay, here I am ready and poised to speak and to get my message out there. I find that that's really helpful.
I love that. I love that. Excellent. So, Paula, tell us about your course, Media Ready Author. We want to hear all about it. What's in it? Where do we find it?
Of course. Yeah. I mean, I have been media training authors for many years and I do it one on one. And I love that. And it's wonderful. But I realize there's so many people out there who can't do a one on one, class with me. And so, how could I make this more accessible? How could I get this to more people? Because the truth of the matter is, I want people's books to be in out in the world. And so if this is the way to do it, why not? So I created Media Ready Author as a way to teach authors all of the elements of being ready, so that when the time comes, you already feel like you've thought through all of these pieces, right? What am I going to say? What is my book about? How do I look on camera? What are the clothes I should be wearing? How should I have my makeup? Where should I sit? What's the best camera to have? What if I get called into a studio? What does that look like? What if I show up and everything goes wrong, right? Like the set goes down. I mean, I've had this happen. Everything has happened in my career, so I've seen it all. The lights go out, or who knows what happens. The guest doesn't show up and now they're shoving you on the stage 5 minutes early and you don't feel ready. You want to have thought through all of these things. How do you talk about your book? How do you show it in the background? Do you bring it with you when you go to media interviews? All of those questions that you have. And I've been on both sides of this, as you know, as an author and also as a producer. So I understand the anxiety, but I always know from a producer standpoint what's going to make the best segment. So we always are talking about, how do you give? How are you able to look at your book and say, okay, what are the best pieces of this that I can really give and I can really serve people with? So that's the course. We talk through all of those elements of, how to speak in sound bites, how to set up your studio, and hopefully how to sell more books, right? So media doesn't always equal book sales, which I think it comes as a surprise to a lot of people. But there are certain types of media and outlets that will do better than others. So we talk about all of that. And, I'm doing a bonus Q&A freebie to go along with the course this year, so that people can ask me questions live, because it is an on-demand course. So as soon as you enroll, you get access, you can watch it. But I'll be doing a live Q&A as well, so that people can ask questions in real time.
I only wish this course had existed years ago when I started, because I feel like, I've learned many of these things the hard way by making mistakes and wasting time. And so to have the opportunity to learn from someone like yourself, who is an insider, who understands it from the producer and the media side, but also as an author, and how do you leverage media, like you were saying, to sell more of your book and to get it out there. I mean, it's really invaluable. You've cut through all of the information, all of the work that's out there to really hand this on a platter to people. So, where can people find the course? How can they sign up? What's the best way to do that?
Yeah, well, if you download the 10 questions every author needs to answer here with that QR code, so you open your app, the camera app, and you go right there, then you'll get information about it. And, there'll be a special link that's sent to you, and you'll be able to enroll right away if you'd like. Or you'll be in my email list and in my world, and I'll be talking about it and I'll be telling you more about it. But it's always good to be prepared ahead of time, I think. A problem that happens a lot of times too is that I get authors from all over. They're self-published, they're traditionally published, they're poets. I mean, I've worked with everyone, fiction, nonfiction, and a lot of times they'll come to me in a panic because thankfully they got a GMA hit that's happening tomorrow. Like unbelievable. But that's for me like the worst type of client to work with, because if they've never done it before, because they're at such a disadvantage. It's like, I wish I would have talked to you 6 months ago to start like laying the groundwork to get you to feel better about being on camera, because the truth of the matter is no one can media train you in a day. I'll do it, but it's not quality. You're not going to learn as much as you would over time. You want to be able to use this again and again on all of your video calls, right? You're going to be practicing it and workshopping it when the stakes are a little bit lower, right? Let's be honest. And so I would much prefer that people did this before they felt like they were ready, because you're using this skill anyway, right? The cameras are not going away. We're not going to stop doing virtual trainings. Like, this is still a thing. So you might as well start to use this, so when the time comes for your book, you'll feel much, much better.
Paula, thank you so much for all of this great information today. And, like we had people say in the comments, this is useful whether or not you're an author, an expert, a thought leader. This is useful information and skills everyone needs. So
Yeah.
I'm really grateful for you taking the time. And I want to encourage everyone who's catching this live, who's catching this on the replay, definitely check out Paula's 10 questions opt-in here. So again, take out your phone. That will bring you right to the link for this page. I'll also make sure it's in the chat here, but it'll be time well spent answering these questions. So Paula, any final thoughts before we wrap up today?
I guess, one of the things that I always tell people is just to not be so hard on yourself. I think we often really are very, very negative towards ourselves and we stop ourselves. And so if you kind of take that thought away and say, "Hey, I'm here to help people. I really want to be as helpful as possible." It really does change the mindset. It switches things for you. And I'm excited for people to get out there and talk about it because if you don't talk about your book or what you do, no one will know. That's the truth.
Yes, 100%. Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
Paula. Thank you everyone for joining us today. And we'll see you soon, everybody. Take care.